People laughed when Ethan Mercer bought a dead apple orchard for just $7. People chuckled. Someone near the back muttered, "That place killed every tree planted there." Another voice answered, "And almost every owner too." Ethan glanced toward the ridge beyond town, where the orchard waited beneath drifting fog. Bare branches clawed at the sky like crooked fingers. At the very center of the hill stood one enormous apple tree darker than the rest, its twisted trunk spreading wide over the dead field like something guarding the land beneath it. Ranger froze the instant he saw it. The dog's posture stiffened. His ears lifted high. Ethan frowned softly. "What is it, boy?" Ranger did not bark. He simply stared toward the distant tree as though listening to a voice carried beneath the wind. "Starting bid," the auctioneer called. $20. Silence. Rain tapped steadily against the roof overhead. Nobody moved. 10. Still nothing. A woman shook her head. "That land's cursed." The auctioneer sighed heavily. "Fine. $7. Ethan looked down at the folded bills in his pocket. $7 was barely enough for gas and canned soup, but lately his life had become little more than roads, cheap motels, and jobs too temporary to remember. Since leaving the Army Corps of Engineers, he had learned that drifting was easier than staying anywhere long enough to feel lost. Beside him, Ranger released a low sound deep in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. Ethan felt it immediately. The dog was never wrong about places. Slowly he raised his hand. "Sold," the auctioneer said almost too quickly. Laughter rolled softly through the crowd as Ethan stepped forward to sign the papers. One old farmer watched him with narrowed eyes beneath the brim of a soaked hat. "That orchard ain't dead by accident," the man muttered quietly as Ethan passed. "Then why hasn't anybody torn it down?" Ethan asked. The old farmer looked toward the distant hill where fog curled around the ancient tree. For a moment his weathered face lost all color. "Because," he whispered, "some roots go deeper than people were meant to follow." As thunder rumbled far beyond the mountains, Ranger suddenly turned toward the orchard and pulled hard against the leash for the first time all day. The road leading toward the orchard narrowed into little more than two muddy tire tracks winding through the hills beyond Ash Hollow. Evening settled slowly over the valley, painting the sky in pale silver and fading blue, while cold mist drifted low across the fields like breath rising from the earth itself. Ethan drove carefully, the old pickup rattling over loose gravel and broken roots that pushed through the road after years without maintenance. Ranger sat upright beside him, silent now, but his eyes remained fixed on the distant hill ahead. The farther they traveled from town, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no voices, only the sound of rainwater dripping from pine branches and the occasional groan of wind through the mountains. Ethan loosened one hand from the steering wheel and rubbed the ache in his shoulder. Old injuries always seemed louder when storms rolled in. At the top of the final ridge, the orchard finally revealed itself in full. Row after row of dead apple trees stretched across the hillside beneath the darkening sky, their branches twisted and hollow like bones left standing long after the life inside them disappeared. Weeds swallowed the old gravel paths between them, and rusted irrigation pipes lay half-buried beneath the earth. Near the center of the property sat a weather-worn barn leaning slightly to one side, beside a small shack with broken shutters and a sagging porch roof. But it was the old tree beyond them that held the eye. Massive, ancient, its trunk wider than Ethan could have wrapped both arms around. Blackened roots rose from the hill like frozen waves gripping the ground beneath them. Even from a distance, the tree felt strangely alive. Ranger let out a low whine. Ethan parked near the shack and shut off the engine. Silence rushed over the hill immediately. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that pressed against the ears until every small sound felt important. Ethan stepped out into the cold evening air, boots sinking slightly into wet soil. The scent hit him first. Damp wood, rotting apples buried somewhere beneath the grass. Rain-soaked earth. Ranger jumped down beside him and immediately turned toward the old tree. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, grabbing his duffel from the truck bed. The shack creaked softly when he pushed the door open. Dust coated every surface inside. A rusted lantern hung crookedly beside the doorway, and an old iron stove sat in the corner beneath a cracked window where rain tapped steadily against the glass. Ethan set down his pack and opened the curtains just enough to let the fading light spill across the floorboards. Years in the army had taught him how to claim abandoned spaces quickly. Check the walls. Check the roof. Find heat. Find water. Keep moving. Yet even while unpacking, he kept noticing Ranger standing perfectly still outside the window, watching the hill, watching the tree. Darkness deepened across the orchard as night settled fully over Ash Hollow. Ethan lit a small fire inside the stove, heating a can of soup while wind whispered faintly through the gaps in the shack walls. Outside, the orchard swayed gently beneath the fog. Branches scraped together with a dry, hollow sound, like distant whispers passing between the trees. Ranger still had not moved from his spot near the old tree. Then suddenly the dog's ears lifted sharply. His body went rigid. Ethan looked up from the stove. At first he heard nothing. Then it came again, a deep wooden groan rolling across the hill. Slow, heavy, almost like the sound of something enormous breathing beneath the ground. Ranger turned toward Ethan briefly, amber eyes wide with alertness, before staring back toward the tree. The sound came a second time, longer now. The old tree was moving. The sound rolled across the orchard again sometime after midnight, deeper this time, like ancient timber bending beneath pressure far below the earth. Ethan stood slowly from the chair beside the stove, every instinct sharpened by years of waking to unfamiliar noises in unfamiliar places. The fire crackled softly behind him, casting thin orange light across the dusty floorboards while rain whispered against the roof overhead. Ranger remained near the doorway, body tense, ears lifted high toward the darkness outside. The German shepherd released a low rumble deep in his chest. Not fear. Warning. Ethan pulled on his jacket and opened the shack door. Cold air rushed in immediately, carrying the scent of wet roots and distant pine. Fog drifted thick across the orchard now, wrapping the dead trees in pale silver shadows that seemed to move whenever the wind shifted. Ranger stepped forward first. Careful. Focused. The dog moved through the tall grass with the quiet confidence of something following a trail only he understood. Ethan grabbed a flashlight from the truck and followed behind him up the hill toward the old tree. Mud clung heavily to his boots with every step. Branches creaked overhead in the darkness. Somewhere far beyond the valley an owl called once before falling silent again. The closer they came to the tree, the stranger the air felt. Warmer somehow. Ethan noticed it immediately. The rest of the orchard carried the sharp cold of late October, but near the hilltop the ground released faint warmth through the mist like heat rising from hidden stone. Ranger stopped beneath the massive branches and stared at the roots twisting from the earth around them. Then the dog barked 3 sharp times. Ethan froze. Ranger only used that bark when something mattered. The German shepherd lowered his nose to the ground and began circling the trunk slowly. Once, twice. Then suddenly he started digging. Dirt sprayed backward beneath his powerful paws. Wet soil scattered across dead grass while Ranger dug with desperate intensity, whining softly between breaths as if trying to uncover something buried long ago. Ranger, Ethan called carefully. Easy. But the dog ignored him completely. Ethan stepped closer and knelt beside the exposed earth. At first he saw nothing except roots and mud. Then his flashlight caught something unnatural beneath the soil. Metal. Ethan brushed away dirt with both hands, revealing the edge of a rusted iron surface hidden beneath the roots. His pulse slowed into that strange, focused calm he remembered from years overseas, when instinct mattered more than thought. Ranger stepped back slightly, but kept staring at the ground, chest rising heavily. Ethan dug deeper with an old shovel he had carried from the truck. The metal surface widened, inch by inch beneath the dirt until its shape finally became clear. A circular iron hatch buried directly beneath the tree. Thick roots wrapped around its edges like veins gripping old bones. Rainwater slid across the rusted surface while Ethan wiped mud away carefully with his sleeve. There were words carved into the iron, nearly erased by time. He angled the flashlight closer. For those who return with kindness. Ethan stared silently at the inscription while cold wind drifted through the orchard behind him. The tree groaned again overhead, but now the sound felt different. Not threatening. Almost relieved. Ranger moved beside him and pressed one paw gently against the hatch. The metal answered with a hollow echo beneath the ground. Ethan looked down slowly into the darkness surrounding the roots. There was empty space under the orchard. Rain continued falling in a soft, steady rhythm over the orchard while Ethan knelt beside the buried hatch with mud covering his hands and sleeves. The flashlight trembled faintly across the rusted iron surface as cold fog drifted between the roots of the old tree. Ranger stood beside him, perfectly still now, amber eyes fixed on the darkness below as if waiting for something to answer back. Ethan placed both hands against the edge of the hatch and pulled. At first nothing moved. The metal groaned softly beneath decades of earth and twisted roots. He adjusted his footing and pulled harder. Slowly the seal broke with a deep hollow sound that rolled beneath the hill like distant thunder. A breath of warm air rose immediately from the opening. Ethan froze. The warmth carried a scent that did not belong underground. Cedar wood, old paper, apples, fresh water. Not decay, not ruin. Ranger stepped closer to the opening and sniffed carefully before glancing back toward Ethan with alert but calm eyes. The flashlight beam disappeared into darkness below, revealing only the top of a narrow iron staircase descending beneath the orchard. Ethan looked back toward the shack far below the hill where a faint glow from the stove flickered through the rain. Every sensible part of him whispered to wait until morning. But something stronger pulled at him now. Something quiet and impossible to explain. He returned to the truck and grabbed a heavier lantern, fresh batteries, and a coil of rope before climbing back beneath the tree. Ranger never left the hatch. The old staircase creaked softly beneath Ethan's boots as they descended into the earth together. The air grew warmer with every step. Above them the storm faded into muffled silence until only the sound of dripping water remained somewhere deep below. The staircase finally opened into a long stone corridor lined with wooden support beams darkened by age but still solid. Ethan raised the lantern slowly. His breath caught in his throat. The underground chamber stretched far wider than the orchard above could have suggested. Old copper pipes ran along the ceiling beside thick wooden beams carved with faded symbols and dates from nearly 70 years earlier. Shelves lined the walls holding rows of glass jars filled with preserved seeds, yellowed maps, and stacks of carefully wrapped notebooks untouched by moisture or time. It did not feel abandoned. It felt protected. Ranger moved ahead slowly through the corridor, nails clicking softly against the stone floor. His ears twitched toward sounds Ethan still could not hear. At the far end of the chamber stood an enormous wooden wheel connected to a narrow underground stream flowing steadily through carved channels in the rock. The wheel still turned slowly beneath the water's current with a faint rhythmic creak. Ethan stared in disbelief. Hydropower, he whispered under his breath. The system was old but brilliantly engineered. Small wires extended from the wheel into the walls of the chamber where dim bulbs hung overhead. Most remained dark, but one flickered weakly as Ethan stepped closer, glowing with pale amber light before fading again. Ranger suddenly stopped beside a long wooden table near the center of the room. A single notebook rested there beneath a layer of dust. Ethan brushed it carefully with his fingertips and opened the cover. The handwriting inside was delicate but steady. October 14th, 1951. If you are reading this, the orchard remembered you. Ethan felt a chill move slowly through him. Despite the warmth underground, he turned the page carefully while Ranger stared toward the deeper tunnel beyond the chamber where darkness continued far beneath the hill. Then somewhere ahead in the unseen blackness, a bell rang once. The sound of the bell faded slowly through the underground corridor until silence settled once more beneath the orchard. Ethan remained motionless beside the wooden table, one hand resting lightly on the open journal while the lantern cast trembling gold light across the stone walls. Ranger stood ahead of him near the tunnel entrance, ears high and body perfectly still, staring into the darkness beyond as though someone had just walked there moments earlier. Ethan swallowed slowly and lifted the journal again. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and dust, preserved by the dry warmth of the chamber below. Most of the entries were written in careful handwriting dated throughout the early 1950s. He skimmed fragments beneath the flickering light. The orchard must remain hidden. The roots protect more than trees now. If the bell rings, someone has returned. Ethan frowned softly. Outside, the world above believed this place had been dead for decades. Yet down here, everything felt suspended in quiet waiting. Ranger released a soft whine and moved deeper into the tunnel. Ethan followed carefully, boots echoing faintly against the stone floor. The corridor curved gently beneath the hill, opening into a second chamber larger than the first. Ethan stopped immediately. Hundreds of wooden crates lined the walls floor to ceiling, each marked with faded handwritten labels. Apple seeds, winter pear, golden hollow, river berry. Shelves overflowed with preserved glass jars containing soil samples, rolled maps, and bundles of handwritten documents tied neatly with twine. At the center of the room stood a long workbench covered with rusted tools and strange mechanical parts connected to old copper tubing. Above it hung dozens of black and white photographs pinned carefully to a corkboard untouched by time. Ethan stepped closer, families smiling beside harvest wagons, children climbing ladders beneath apple trees heavy with fruit. Lantern, festivals glowing across the hillside. One photograph caught his attention immediately, the orchard from decades earlier. Alive, endless rows of healthy trees stretched across the hills beneath summer sunlight. And near the center stood the enormous tree above them now, already ancient even then. Written beneath the photograph in faded ink were 4 words. The keeper tree remembers. Ranger suddenly barked once. Sharp, focused. Ethan turned quickly. The dog stood beside a narrow wooden door hidden at the far end of the chamber. Water dripped faintly somewhere behind it. Ethan pushed the door open carefully. Warm air brushed against his face, carrying the unmistakable scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. He stepped inside and stared in silence. A hidden greenhouse stretched beneath the orchard, illuminated by rows of weak amber bulbs powered by the underground water wheel. Vines climbed along hanging wooden frames overhead. Small apple saplings grew in carefully arranged soil beds beside rows of herbs and flowering plants, somehow still alive beneath the earth after all these years. Tiny droplets of water shimmered across green leaves beneath the soft light. Ethan felt something tighten quietly in his chest. It was beautiful, not abandoned, protected. Ranger moved slowly between the rows of plants, tail lowered now, calmer than before. Then Ethan noticed another sound beneath the greenhouse. Faint at first, like distant moving water. He followed the noise toward the back wall where thick roots from the great tree above twisted through the stone ceiling like giant veins. Between them flowed a narrow stream of perfectly clear water running beneath the entire underground sanctuary. Ethan knelt beside it and touched the surface carefully. Warm. The moment his fingers brushed the water, one of the old amber lights overhead flickered brighter. Then another. Ranger looked upward immediately. Somewhere deep beneath the orchard, unseen machinery groaned softly back to life. The underground sanctuary no longer felt silent after the machinery awakened beneath the hill. A soft mechanical hum now drifted through the hidden chambers like a heartbeat returning after decades. Asleep, amber lights flickered steadily overhead, casting warm reflections across the flowing stream and the roots twisting through the stone ceiling above Ethan's head. Ranger moved calmly beside him through the greenhouse rows, occasionally stopping to sniff the air as though the dog recognized something comforting hidden beneath the scent of damp earth and cedar wood. Ethan stood near the old water channel, studying the ancient system with growing disbelief. Whoever built this place had not simply hidden beneath the orchard. They had designed an entire world capable of surviving underground for years. He followed the copper pipes along the stone wall until they disappeared behind another wooden partition near the back of the greenhouse. When he pushed the door open, cold air drifted out carrying the dry scent of paper and dust. The room beyond was smaller and darker than the others. Shelves lined every wall filled with ledgers, maps, family records, and neatly stacked newspapers tied with cloth ribbon. A heavy oak desk sat beneath a hanging lantern beside an old radio set covered in dust. Ranger stepped into the room slowly and lowered his head near the floorboards beneath the desk. Ethan noticed fresh scratches in the wood there, long faded but deliberate. He knelt carefully and found another hidden compartment built beneath the floor. Inside rested a small metal box sealed tightly against moisture. Ethan opened it slowly. Photographs, letters, immigration documents, old ration cards from the 1940s. At the very bottom lay a folded newspaper clipping yellowed by age. Ethan held it beneath the lantern light. Local family vanishes after night fire. Ash Hollow orchard abandoned. He frowned, and continued reading. According to the article, the Whitmore family had disappeared suddenly after a fire destroyed part of the orchard nearly 70 years earlier. Town officials claimed the family fled during the night after financial collapse, and unpaid debts forced them off the land. But the article felt incomplete. Too clean. Too rehearsed. Ethan turned the clipping over and noticed handwritten words on the back. "We never left willingly." Ranger released a low growl near the doorway. Ethan looked up. The dog stared toward the old radio set resting on the shelf beside the desk. A faint crackling sound emerged from the speaker. Soft at first, barely audible beneath the hum of the machinery outside. Ethan stepped closer slowly. Static drifted through the room in uneven bursts until suddenly a voice appeared beneath the interference. Weak, fragile, light beneath the roots, then silence again. Ethan stared at the radio in disbelief. The system should not even have power after all these years. Ranger's ears twitched sharply. The voice returned for only a moment longer. "If someone finds this, protect the orchard." The signal vanished into static once more. Ethan swallowed hard and looked around the room again. Suddenly, the sanctuary felt less like a forgotten shelter and more like a message waiting decades for the right person to hear it. He opened another ledger on the desk and found names listed carefully across several pages. Families, dates, supplies distributed during winter shortages, shelter assignments, hidden routes through the mountains. Ethan slowly realized the truth. This place had not only preserved seeds and trees, it had protected people. During the years after the war, someone beneath this orchard had secretly sheltered families escaping hunger and displacement. The sanctuary was never built for survival alone. It was built for mercy. Ranger moved toward the far wall and stopped beside a faded map pinned beneath a rusted compass. Ethan stepped closer. A red circle marked the exact center of the orchard above them. Beside it, someone had written 4 words in trembling ink. "The tree chooses the keeper." The words on the map lingered in Ethan's mind long after he stepped away from the hidden records room. The tree chooses the keeper. He could still hear the faint crackle of the old radio behind him as Ranger guided him deeper through the underground sanctuary. Somewhere above the orchard, rain continued falling across the dead branches and forgotten hills of Ash Hollow. But down here the air carried only warmth, moving water, and the quiet pulse of old machinery returning slowly to life. Ethan followed the narrow corridor beyond the greenhouse until the stone walls widened into another chamber unlike any he had seen before. This room felt older, sacred almost. Massive roots from the great tree above twisted across the ceiling and down the walls like living pillars, their bark glowing softly beneath strands of amber light. At the center stood a circular stone basin filled with perfectly clear water fed by the underground stream. The surface shimmered gently, even though nothing disturbed it. Ranger approached the basin carefully and lowered his head to drink. The moment the dog touched the water, a deep vibration moved through the chamber floor beneath Ethan's boots. Somewhere behind the walls, gears shifted. Water rushed louder through hidden channels beneath the orchard. Ethan turned sharply as another row of amber bulbs flickered alive one after another down the corridor behind him. The sanctuary was waking up completely now. Then he noticed it. Above the basin, tiny green buds had appeared along several roots hanging from the ceiling. Fresh growth. Ethan stepped closer in disbelief and touched one carefully between his fingers. Soft. Alive. Impossible. Nothing in the orchard above had bloomed in decades. Yet here beneath the earth, life had quietly endured, all along waiting for something to return. Ranger barked once and trotted toward the far side of the chamber, where a narrow iron gate stood partially hidden behind thick roots. Ethan pushed it open slowly. Inside rested a small vault lined with wooden shelves and locked cabinets. Most were empty now except for a single steel box resting alone on a table beneath a hanging lantern. Dust coated its surface untouched for years. Ethan lifted the lid carefully. Inside were bundles of cash wrapped in faded cloth, gold coins sealed in glass jars, and stacks of legal documents tied neatly with ribbon. But what caught his attention most was the envelope resting at the very top. Written across the front in faded ink were the words, "For the one who returns after the silence." Ethan opened it slowly. The letter inside had been signed by Eleanor Whitmore, the last known owner of the orchard before the disappearance. Her handwriting trembled across the page. If this sanctuary has awakened again, then the orchard has chosen someone worthy of it. We built this place not to hide wealth, but to preserve kindness when the world forgot how. The tree listens. The water remembers. And if the roots bloom again, Ash Hollow still has hope. Ethan lowered the letter slowly while silence settled around him. Years ago, he had built bridges in places torn apart by fear and loss. He had spent most of his life helping strangers survive while quietly forgetting how to belong anywhere himself. Yet standing beneath the orchard now, surrounded by hidden life preserved beneath the roots, he felt something he had not felt in years. Purpose. Ranger stepped beside him and rested against his leg. Then suddenly the entire chamber trembled softly once more. Above them came the faint sound of rushing water moving through pipes for the first time in decades. Ethan looked upward. Somewhere outside beyond the dead orchard, the old irrigation system had begun flowing again. Morning arrived slowly over Ash Hollow wrapped in pale fog and silver light. Ethan climbed from the underground sanctuary just before dawn with Ranger beside him, both covered in dirt and the scent of cedar and old stone. Cold air greeted them beneath the massive branches of the keeper tree, but something had changed during the night. Ethan noticed it immediately. Water. Thin streams flowed through the rusted irrigation channels, weaving across the orchard for the first time in decades. The old pipes groaned softly beneath the hill, while clear water rushed downhill through broken trenches lined with moss and fallen leaves. Ranger trotted ahead through the wet grass, tail lifting slightly as the first pale sunlight spread across the valley. Ethan followed slowly, hardly believing what he saw. Along the nearest row of dead trees, tiny green shoots had begun emerging from branches that had looked lifeless only hours earlier. Not many, just a few, but enough. Ethan reached out carefully and touched one small bud trembling beneath a droplet of rainwater. Soft, living. The orchard was waking up. By mid-morning, word had already begun spreading through town. Ethan noticed the first truck arriving near the hill shortly after sunrise. Then another. Locals gathered quietly near the fence line, staring toward the flowing irrigation ditches with expressions that shifted somewhere between disbelief and fear. An elderly man stepped closer than the others. Ethan recognized him immediately as the farmer from the auction. The old man removed his hat slowly while staring at the orchard. "I have not seen water move through those lines since I was a boy," he said softly. Ethan looked toward the hill where the great tree stood motionless against the morning sky. What happened here? The old farmer hesitated for a long moment before answering. People in town told stories after the Whitmores disappeared. Said the orchard turned cursed overnight. Crops failed. Livestock got sick. Folks stayed away. His weathered eyes lowered toward the running water. Truth is, most people believed somebody wanted that family gone. Ethan remained silent. Ranger stood beside him watching the crowd carefully, ears twitching at every movement. The old farmer glanced toward the dog. That shepherd found something, did he not? Ethan nodded once. The old man exhaled slowly. Then maybe the land finally decided to speak. Over the next several days, Ethan barely slept. He repaired broken irrigation lines with salvaged tools from the barn, while Ranger followed him through the orchard from sunrise until nightfall. The sanctuary below continued humming quietly beneath the hill like a hidden heartbeat under the roots. Each morning brought new signs of life. Green buds spread farther across the dead trees. Wildflowers emerged beside the old stone paths. Even the air smelled different now. Fresher, sweeter, like spring arriving months too early. Then, 3 days after the water returned,